Hey guys, I hope you're well. In today's video, I'll be making a tier list of the defenses you can play against e4 and d4. I'll be taking a look at their theory, the quality, the difficulty, as well as the overall style of play so you can make a decision of whether you want to go ahead and learn that opening. Also, stick around to the very end and I'll give you my top 3 picks of openings for people who are looking to improve over the long term. So let's jump right in. Okay, let's kick things off with the opening defenses against e4, starting with the Pirc. This happens after d4, knight f6, knight c3, and black continues with g6 fianchettoing the bishop on the king side. This probably deserves to go in the champion tier since it isn't played very often at the very high level. The next one is the Owens. Black fianchettos the queen side. The downside, as you can see, is white gets the 2 pawns in the center and it's very comfortable and easy development. Not too much problems there. The next one is the Sicilian. The Sicilian is a very high tier opening and it suits players who are more aggressive and like dynamic style of play. There's also many options and variety to choose from in Sicilian, so it's one of my personal favorites. It's also played by many of the world's top players and past world champions. Therefore, I would put the Sicilian at the very top. The next one is St. George. St. George is e4, a6. Obviously a very low quality opening because we're not developing any pieces and a6 is not helping our position much. So I would put this one definitely at the bottom of the pile. The next one is the Caro-Kann. So Caro-Kann I quite like because it's a mixture between solid, but also you get a lot of positions where you can play for a bit more if you want to. And it's fairly easy to learn and you don't run into many of the problems that you would in the French with your light squared bishop. So it's a little bit more friendly to learn at a beginner level as well. So I'm a big fan of the Caro-Kann and I would definitely put the Caro-Kann at the very highest level. Next one on the list is the Nimzowitsch. So this one is more of a tricky opening where black is trying to avoid a lot of white's theoretical options in the other lines and he just wants to get a playable position, and he has many options here. Can play e5 after we play d4. He can also play d6. He can also play the move pawn to d5. So there's a lot of options here, but I wouldn't say it's the best for black, since if white knows what he's doing, can get quite a nice position. Bo is more of a setup than an opening, but black plays the same setup against anything white plays virtually, so it can be played against d4 as well. The hippo is much better against some setups white plays than against others, so if you're playing it in every single game, then it might not be the best option. But it goes something like this, where black will put the knights in the center and he'll fianchetto his bishops to the side of the board and just wait and see what white does and continue from there. So if you were playing this in every single game, then it wouldn't be considered that good, and I would probably put it somewhere at the bottom here. The next e4 opening is the Norwegian. So the Norwegian is a variation of the modern, which happens after d4, knight to f6, e5, knight h5. So this one I believe is not very good. It's just mainly tricks. The main trick black wants is white to play bishop e2. Black will answer with d6, and black wants white to take the knight on h5, after which he enters into some sharp variations. So I put it somewhere here, probably. So next one on the list is e5. So e5 is one of the first openings we learn in chess, of course, and there's a good reason for that because it's by far the most solid of the options on this list. One of the openings you probably should learn when you're starting out because you'll get into some very classical positions. I'll put it at the very top for sure. So Alekhines is a little bit more offbeat, but it's certainly playable. I've played it for a while as well, but after I get into positions where white is fairly comfortable and it's not that fun to play after a while. I would put it in the playable pile. The next one is the Portuguese. Goes like this. So instead of the Scandinavian, black's idea is that we're going to sacrifice a pawn and go for some very sharp development and initiative. Really suits players who are comfortable attacking and want something very, very aggressive early on, but you will have to most likely sacrifice a pawn in majority of the variations you play. So it's not played at the very top level because it's very comfortable for white once he knows what he's doing, but it's definitely fun to play at lower levels. I would put it up here in the respectable pile. The next one on the list is the Scandinavian. So similar to the Portuguese, except that here we're not going to play knight f6, we're going to take the pawn immediately on d5, and when the queen is chased, we'll bring it back to either d8, d6, or swing it across to a5. And the structure I find is very, very solid for black, but it's not the easiest opening to develop a plan and progress for a win sometimes. I would put it around where the Scandinavian and Portuguese are, maybe above the Portuguese, just because it's a bit more solid. The next one we see is the French. French has been played at the top level for quite a long time. The only downside is that this bishop on c8 never really gets into the game sometimes, and it becomes black's major problem in this structure. You also have to play a lot of closed positions, and positions can go for a long time in these structures, so you have to maneuver pieces around a bit. If you're not a fan of these sort of closed structures, then you probably should avoid the French. But it's definitely a high tier opening. Next one is the modern. Modern takes place after g6, d4, bishop to g7. So the idea of the modern is that we're not going to develop the knight on g8 for a while. So we're trying to improve on, say, the Pirc and gain a little bit more flexibility. I like this way of playing. And if you're going to choose between the Pirc and modern, I prefer the modern because it gives you a lot more options. You can also bring the knight to f6 whenever you want later. So I would put the modern definitely higher than the Pirc, although they're both probably around the same tier objectively. Okay, next we have the c6 modern. The c6 modern is again very similar, but black will play c6 here and follow up with d5. So there's a line, if white plays f4, black will play d5, and we'll get sort of a mix between a modern and a Caro-Kann, where this bishop will go outside the pawn structure eventually and trade off, and then black will put all his pawns on white squares. It's not a bad system, and it's definitely playable. I put it somewhere in the middle though, because it's not much flexibility compared to the other ones. The next one is the black lion. Black lion is a setup for black. Usually starts with either e5 or d6, but I'll just show you the general setup we get to. So it's usually something like this, I believe. And black will forego castling and just play knight f8, followed by the move pawn to g5, knight to g6, and go for a very quick kingside attack. This can be very effective at lower levels of chess, where I've had to face it in club level a lot of times and tournament level when I was a junior, and fell victim to it a number of times. So it can be very dangerous, but I feel like once white knows not to push pawns in front of his king and gets more comfortable defending, then there's not much flexibility to this setup, because you're always going for the same kingside attack every single game. So I put it a little bit lower. And the last one on this list is the Philidors. So the Philidors tends to happen after d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, and black will play the move pawn to e5. And black wants white to take and trade off the queens, where black will get a very comfortable queenless middle game to end game. And if white doesn't trade off, then black will just follow up with either knight d7 as well as pawn takes, and bishop to e7 is a fairly good line. The Philidor is a very good option for you to play if you want to avoid a lot of the theory in many of the other lines. I would definitely put it a little bit higher on this list. Whether it's a champion opening, probably not, but I put it on the top here of the respectable pile. So my top 3 picks would be the Sicilian, e5 and Caro-Kann. e5 being on the solid end, Sicilian on the tactical aggressive side, and the Caro-Kann is a good mixture in between. Of course, all the openings on this list are perfectly playable, and I suggest you have fun trying them out and seeing what works best for you. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you on the next one where I go through the openings against 1d4.